Nothing could be more spectacular than this fascinating lit à l'antique by Pierre-Antoine Bellangé, the maker who delivered furniture to the White House in 1817, one of the most celebrated French names in early 19th century furniture history. Welcome to the channel, welcome back to the channel, where today we have an incredible piece that has taken me over 2.5 years to get by some very strange means. But nevertheless, the piece is on par in quality with the highest quality works of Empire period furniture published or conserved here in France in national museums or foreign curatorial institutions worldwide. And so that's why it's relevant for us to take a look at in the overarching discussion of antiques, that ambiguous term, hoping to help people better differentiate between, let's say, everyday mass-produced antiques and then these early art quality works of decorative art. Also, you can see that we are presenting it now without any of the dressing, without the box springs or the mattress, or the decorative skirt that needs to be refabricated to drape below the bed here and cover this intentionally open space of the platform. Now, you can also see that this piece has been re-French polished by a firm who does that kind of work for the French government, and a bit later on in the video we will discuss the conservational aspects or lack thereof, particularly why the conservation of any historic patina on this particular piece was a bit of a catch-22, a bit of an impossible dilemma. And the attribution to Bellangé is pretty logical to begin with, but it at first issues from the presence of 2 bedroom armchairs which matched this bed, which were actually signed by Pierre-Antoine Bellangé, and which were, sort of unfortunately for me, conserved by the previous owner's family. We should establish that this is a very special and rare type of piece. It is a lit à l'antique, a lit, a bed, in the manner of antiquity, and we will see one depicted here in this Percier and Fontaine drawing from their celebrated 1812 publication of Interior Designs. Now, it is pretty typical for antique dealers to present pieces like this without any fabric, but just to drive that point home that this is nowhere near the end game of the fabric job here, why don't we take a look at one of the drawings in the Bellangé album, now conserved in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That should give you an idea of what this bed will look like once we have it recovered. So, moving on, these beds are exponentially rarer and they are distinguished from the typical boat bed of the period, such as this one. It's a rather exceptional one, but nevertheless very much different than the one we have here, which was also made by Pierre-Antoine Bellangé for the Maréchal Berthier, now conserved and displayed in the Château de Grosbois. We also notice in this photo that this bed does have a platform which was finished, interestingly, underneath where the fabric skirt would have gone, but we also see the rail between the front feet where the fabric skirt would have been attached. Too bad they didn't finish the center of this platform, although I am going to have 2 sides of the platform since it is unfinished, as the whole thing was intended to be recessed into an alcove. I'm going to have 2 sides fabricated which can be removed so that we're not really altering things, but such that the piece can be presented today, whether in a home or a museum, without necessarily having to build an alcove or or invest in a sort of amazing canopy of curtains, which would, of course, I suppose, fit the intended purpose of how to display the bed while also simultaneously depriving you of being able to see it from the front and the sides. And anyway, so the lit à l'antique, or these beds in the manner of antiquity that we know the most, are firstly in a little bit later style, an aesthetic more to the tune of the Restoration period of the 1820s, this being more to the tune of the Empire period, circa 1810, at least aesthetically. We'll get into the exact dating in a moment. But those beds would begin by, let's say, the one by Jean-Christophe Fischer in the Paris Museum of Decorative Arts. You'll also notice that they apparently had a contemporary platform fabricated to display the piece. And now the second one is probably the bed of François-Joseph de Talma, who was Napoleon's favorite actor, and on his bed, in this old photo of it when it traded on the art market in 1929, we see the fabric skirt, and here now in the museum where it resides in Lisbon, we can see that apparently the platform, despite the blurriness of the image, the platform that it's on, probably original, appears to be unfinished beneath the bed, just like the platform of this one. Then, in 2006, we see the listing for the bedroom set of Mademoiselle Mars, who happened to live pretty much on the same street as François-Joseph de Talma, so they both had pretty awesome beds, very close to one another at the time. But her bed and the other pieces with it were on the art market then for 500 to 700,000 euros, and all of this is part of the information that led me to conclude that we're dealing with a very special and coveted type of piece here. And again, those beds really are more to the tune of the Restoration period. There's something less masculine, less imperial about them, with much of their artistic value issuing from the finesse of the bronzes, whereas here we are relying more on these stark mahogany surfaces and the boldness of the sculpture. So anyway, this piece really makes us think of earlier works by Bellangé, pieces that would have come from the Consulate period, even at the end of the 18th century, certainly empire work made between vaguely 1800 and 1815. Now, I would like to say that this bed dates to right about 1810, and perhaps a little speculation about the chairs that I still have photographed would allow us to say that. And the bed itself does kind of remind us of the Bellangé desk, which is dated to 1810, now conserved in the Musée Marmottan. But it is actually quite hard to say, because if we look at some of the higher quality mahogany works that Bellangé was making, such as this wonderful furniture in the billiards room of the Château de Harouet, we see that even after the fall of the empire in the late 18 teens, Bellangé was still making work in this heavy, masculine, sort of ferocious empire style. Some scholars have referred to that as sort of a second empire. But, long story short, this bed belongs to the aesthetics of about 1810, and the other beds of comparable quality that we see in museums, they belong more to the aesthetics of the 1820s. In any case, it is by Bellangé, and it's really pretty much one of a kind and amazing, and we love it. Now, another word about the platform here, which is part of why this is such a unique and interesting piece, and there's a certain curatorial significance to the presence of the platform. Number one, because platforms from the very beginning were very rare. Only the grandest pieces and probably the most eccentric people, ever wanted a platform. But then it's possible that these platforms got, quite a lot of foot traffic. I'm not going to stand on it because I have shoes on, and this is probably more of a sock affair. But, we can imagine that the platforms were used quite a bit, and they might have gotten thrown out. And also with this platform being unfinished on its sides, the sides reveal to us that this entire apparatus was meant to be recessed into an alcove. And that's a fashion which, it was more decorative, but I suppose it helped keep the heat in under a canopy of curtains as well, tucked into your alcove. But the fashion disappeared in the early 19th century. By the end of the first third of the 19th century, alcoves really weren't being built anymore. And so one might also surmise that some of the platforms for these impressive empire showpieces, des meubles d'apparat, this is an appearance piece, a real showpiece, rather than something that was purely functional from the beginning. But one can imagine that as the trend of alcoves was phased out, that maybe people thought, well, throw away the platform. In any case, the platform is very special and rare to have. And in fact, the entire platform, oh God, we don't like the sound of creaking wood, but, it's still a piece of furniture. The platform rolls, and it does so with the help of 9 box tree or ebony wheels down there. And then the bed itself can roll forward on the platform. We in fact see the little lines or the quasi-cracks there perpendicular to the platform that are traces of the life of this piece. As the bed was rolled forward on top of its platform, in order to probably be made every day, since you sort of have trouble accessing the back of the piece from the front. But also we see that the entire platform itself could roll forward, and there even appear to be little handles fixed in here where 2 people could have rolled the whole thing out from the alcove or from, let's say, the canopy of curtains that might have once decorated the room. All right, so with all of that out of the way, why don't we have a word about the restoration of a piece which is as significant as this. As many of you might be wondering why I stripped this piece entirely, so violently, of its historic patina. And I will answer your question by saying that I did not. In fact, the sun stripped this piece of its historic patina across a solid 50% of the bed, starting from here, all the way down here, all the way across, and ending there. And so, that means simply that all of the layers of wax and smog and nicotine back before cigarettes killed you, people used to smoke all the time, and then finally the underlying original layer of French polish, this lacquer-based finish that you dissolve in alcohol, and it's identical to what I've put on it now. Well, all of that had been absolutely obliterated by the sun. So even though the back retained a very charming dark brown patina that had accrued over 200 years magically, it was very, very far from homogeneous. So what we could have done would have been to imitate that patina across half of the bed, but I felt that there was something inherently less authentic about doing that than simply refinishing the piece to its original aesthetic when Bellangé delivered it 200 and some odd years ago. And thankfully, there were some areas of the bed, particularly here and down here, which had always been covered by mattresses. And so despite the relatively untouched and sun-bleached state of conservation in which I found the piece, we were able to see the original red color of the piece and part of the original French polish, which of course had oxidized some, and its luster had toned down quite a bit. The entire point of this piece, that it is intended to be appreciated as this aesthetic object, which is not light brown, which is not dark brown, but which is in fact startlingly red and which showcases these golden veins of the mahogany that you can see across the front. And the French polisher is extremely talented. She does this work for the French government. If a museum purchases this bed, they will probably request that I temper the French polish, as she spared no expense in time or materials applying this complicated finish. She definitely lifted it up, as we say in French. It is very shiny. A more conservative institution will temper that, but also private individuals tend to find the lustrous shine rather compelling and to the tune of a modern interior. Anyway, this return to an original state is nevertheless the outcome of a dilemma, but one which I hope presents aesthetic and indirect historical benefits that outweigh any conservation of the rear side's patina and an attempt to simulate that patina broadly across the front. Now, one might wonder if you could have just switched the bed around on the platform, and you sort of could have, except that prior to plugging the holes to discourage the new owner from doing any scooting of this bed forward on its platform, which would only continue to scratch it. Prior to plugging those holes, there were open channels in the back feet of the bed here, which suggests that the bed has always been presented on the platform in this direction. Nevertheless, it is very interesting to note that this bed is finished on all sides, something that is quite exceptional, making it a meuble de milieu, something that could be out in the middle of the room, even though it was always intended to be on this platform and in an alcove. Someone who was purchasing a piece like this, along with the depth of quality that was offered that time for items that were this nice, they went ahead and finished the back identically to the front. One might even suppose that that allowed the original customer to consider that, one day if I don't want my beautiful lit à l'antique to be in its alcove, perhaps I could lift it up and take it out into the middle of a room, some sort of grand library sitting area, and I could use it as a very interesting daybed as well. Anyway, everybody, I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for sticking with the channel over the last year, because I haven't really been posting, namely because finding pieces like this is not exactly easy. And of course, like usual, if you would like to support the endeavor of building this online period furniture library of the most compelling pieces that I find, please subscribe to the channel. It would be most appreciated. I believe that it will help some people better understand the difference between the everyday antiques that they might encounter and want to buy and some of these true works of art from furniture history that, if with some patience and definitely a little bit bigger budget, they might end up with. Thank you.